Uhuru means freedom. My name is Coco Lewis. I'm the International Economic Development Coordinator of the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, and I'm also your MC for tonight's political education. African Women Must Lead with Yejide or Mila is a series of live monthly political education programs from the African National Women's Organization. Led by President Yejide or Mila, tonight's discussion is integration, the downfall of African people. Today is the 70th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education System, a decision which is determined that segregation in public education was unconstitutional. This is a landmark Supreme Court decision which led to the wave of desegregation across the other sectors such as higher education, housing, restaurants, etc. Desegregation allowed for African people to become patrons of white institutions that they had previously been barred from. Tonight, President Yejide will provide a point of view that integration drastically set African people back, defunding the civil rights movement and undermining African self-determination. There will be opportunities to raise issues about this PE during our Q&A period, but please like, comment, and engage throughout the program. African Women Must Lead is being multi-streamed live on the Bernie Spear TV and ANWO channels on YouTube, ANWO's Facebook page, and hopefully on our Instagram. Please take some time to like, share, and follow us on these platforms. ANWO is also on Instagram and Twitter for the folks who want to keep up with what we're doing between broadcasts. If you'd like to know the exact dates of our streams, make sure you follow us and check out our website for more details. Uhuru, welcome, President Yejide.
Uhuru, comrade. Uhuru, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'll get started.
All right, I'm really excited. This is, we have strong views about this.
Oh yeah, it was bleeding into a lot of discussions this week, so I'm happy to cause some more discussion and engage in some questions and answers or just comments. And I don't have all the answers, so that would be great. Thank you, comrade.
Uhuru.
And as you can see, I got my 1960 style glasses on today, so in honor of what's happening. So my name is Yejide Orumila, and I'm gonna first and foremost say that I'm not necessarily a separatist. And as far as I feel like, Black people need to have a place we have Africa, but I don't necessarily have a stance against integration. But I do want to examine integration and under colonial domination, how it really impacted the entire landscape of Black African America, and how it contributed toward the defunding of the civil rights movement, and also how it undermines African self-determination. Over the last week or so, there's been a couple of discussions that I've had personally, and other kind of discussions. We just had a PE last night around colonialism. And one of the main trends has always been about like Black entrepreneurship and Black business, and how Black people don't support each other and things like that, and how we got to bring back Black cohesive economics, and people recognizing that as one of the biggest pitfalls, right, of integration. And I first want to say that I'm not opposed necessarily, right, to integration. I know I said the downfall, but because we know, if we go back to those times, they couldn't see what's happening now. But if you go back to these times, separate but equal was African people living in their own communities, although they were targeted by the white population who were carrying out terroristic policy and threats and violence against these particular African communities. African schools, Black schools that were supposed to be separate but equal or not. They didn't have the same sort of institutions. In some places, they didn't have the books. They didn't have all the things that the public education system was sending out to white schools. Black schools were not getting that. And they were also not getting the funding that they needed in order to ensure that the facilities that they were using were up to par with the white counterparts who were also using public school. So I can see the motivation for really pursuing this integration in public education, because that's what it was. It wasn't like integration for all. It was public education was the integrationist objective. We want to have our children go to school and receive the same kind of education that these white students are receiving, and have and ultimately believe that you're going to get the same opportunities. Well, I don't know if they believe they're going to have the same opportunities, but they have more opportunities at the time. So the Brown versus Board of Education ruling was around public schools. It was, once that landmark decision was made, other areas of sectors of society were also now going to desegregate. They were being pushed to desegregate by the growing and rising civil rights movement that were winning in the courts. So we have more people trying to now desegregate housing, so moving into other, because they ruled the Brown versus Board of Education decision ruled that segregation was unconstitutional and therefore illegal. So this was not spread out. It wasn't instantaneous. You had to say, okay, now what are we going to do? Are we going to challenge this thing? And so Black people who were saying we're going to challenge whether or not the United States is going to uphold that this is unconstitutional to segregate. So they started to challenge it in different areas. So with housing, I can now move into a community that you say I couldn't move in now. You can't discriminate against me because you said it was unconstitutional. So people were going and buying houses here and there, now places where that will be better for, they thought would be better for them. And it happened to be in those white communities that had all the nice stuff and things like that. And then we have hotels are being desegregated, restaurants are being desegregated, higher education. And I'm saying this not like they were just like, yeah, we're going to desegregate. Like African people challenged the oppressive nature of segregation, and they therefore pressured these institutions to desegregate. Some of the arguments that Black people gave to these establishments, like, you might as well, because we're going to spend our dollars here, you're going to be making more money. So it essentially it made more dollars, it made more sense in dollars than it did just not excluding this group of people. Unfortunately, what that did then is that before segregation was named illegal, before that, we had hotels, we had restaurants, we had businesses, we had doctors, we had lawyers, and all of this was contained within our community. So our community had a various array of businesses that catered to all portions of African life. That was forced because of the society that we were in. Reconstruction era. After slavery was made illegal in the United States, and Reconstruction era laws were being passed, and the 14th Amendment was ratified to say that that every person, whether you were a slave or were formerly enslaved or not, is now equal under the law. And so it wasn't until, though, the Plessy versus Ferguson, because that's what the Brown versus Board of Education ruling undid. And about 50 years earlier, in 1896, the Plessy versus Ferguson case, where a mixed race African living in Louisiana was like, I don't want to sit in the Black cars, and I'm challenging this because I should be able to sit anywhere I want. But also, there was no legal standing, there was no legality that said that segregation definitely was illegal. It was just culture at the time, because of slavery and colonialism, that people were living separately, operating separately, and these were the communities that were growing. So there was also a fear of whiteness and a fear of Blackness and things like that were emerging. So things kind of fell in that way. But there was no law that legally said that segregation was legal until Plessy versus Ferguson, where a mixed race African challenged the law, saying that he was not being afforded the 14th Amendment, which said that we are all equal under the law. Why do I have to even sit in these cars? And they overturned that and said, no, it's separate but equal. and you do not, and this does not violate the 14th Amendment. Like us saying that this, that you have to sit here does not violate the 14th Amendment because it's separate but equal. And what the Brown versus Board of Education ruling did was saying that the separate but equal is unconstitutional, and everybody can live everywhere or go to school anywhere they want to, because, if we're saying that African people are citizens of the United States and all these other kind of things, then they should be able to go wherever they want to go, and experience life the way they want to experience. And they hadn't really been challenged until it became legal and unconstitutional based on this decision. So as I retrack again, I was just trying to explain. So what happened as a result of this? So before segregation, before desegregation, put the glasses back on, I got to read. But the Black dollar circulated in the African community 3 years before leaving. Now, the Black dollar circulates 6 hours, maybe less, depending which community that you're in. Unemployment rate for Black people was less than that of whites nationally and regionally. Now it's more. So right now in 2023, well, as of 2023, Africans make up 5.6. There's 5.6 unemployment rate in the African sector of the nation, and then but it's lower than it has been in years, right? And then, but it's still higher than white people, which is at 3.2%. We also had locally owned, Black owned businesses that represented all categories of life. So it wasn't just like, oh, somebody was selling a shirt or a t-shirt. There was like businesses grocery stores, there were banks, there were all sectors of life. Black people were running it in our communities and in our towns. And right now we know that we don't have any real place where that is being exemplified. Black people are integrated into the current social structure. There's not necessarily a Black town, even though we might have ghettos and things like that. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to also have Black doctors, like the culture of life. You knew that when you stepped out your house and you had to go to the doctor, you was going to see Dr. Johnson, and who's a Black man. You also knew that you're going to go to the grocery store and you're going to see Mr. Fogel, whatever the name was. You're going to see the Black grocer, you're going to see the Black nurse, you're going to see the Black school teacher, you're going to see the Black crossing guard and the Black police. That was right. Well, sometimes you have the center Black police, but there might be the overarching white colonial police that are also policing you. But you had a contained community that was thriving and surviving, and people were cohesive based on the fact that they were forced into these situations that the colonial law had placed us in. And then also in terms of land ownership and land stuff. So Black people before 1910 had ownership of 14% of the land of the United States. So, and I hate to use the word ownership but that's essentially what it is. After Africans were so-called free from colonial enslavement, then what they started doing was purchasing land and opportunities and building their own communities and doing all these things, homesteading, so that they can now have a life for themselves and their children and have property that they can hand over. So Africans started to cultivate land and build on land. Black farmers had 16 million acres of land to farm on. And this was all before 1910. So it didn't happen because of integration, but over the course of about 70 years, more than that, 1910, from 1910 to 2017, Black farmers are now at 2.9 million acres, which is less than 1% of all farming land, which is like a 0.32%. So Black people, after the colonial slavery, was able to kind of bounce back, to trying to cultivate what they had before they were enslaved, even though they didn't know Mama Africa really. But the communalism that came from now being able to raise your own families, marry each other, move to different places, and not be beholden to a slave owner was really motivation for that. And the Reconstruction era, forget the timeline that Reconstruction was happening, but there was a lot of like social transformation. So I liken the Reconstruction era to switching from capitalism to socialism, where all new ideas are happening. Like you're challenging this, and you're starting this, and you're creating this. So laws are being passed. There were things that were being used to protect the rights of Black people who are now in. And it was the federal government was involved in actually making sure that Black people were not continued to be subjugated by the white oppressive masses. So, and there's a lot of community around like ensuring that these formerly enslaved Africans were now being integrated and helped up. But that all stopped at a certain point, and all the so-called progress that was being done in Reconstruction was stripped away. So, that was in 1868, 1870, around that time. So between 1870 and 19, when the Brown versus Board of Education ruled, 1954, African people had experienced unspoken and spoken restriction from access from everything, and therefore had created their own community and their own experience. And some people I have heard blame Black people for wanting what the oppressor has, right? Like for wanting to be closer to the oppressor, wanting to live in their communities, wanting to, shirking our stores because white people had better stuff, or I don't know, whatever the reasoning was. There's a blame game that happens among African people in some sectors that we did this to ourselves. Like integration was a law that we placed, and then that was place of, we didn't have to go and shop over there. We didn't have to go and live in this place. But I want to read an excerpt from Frantz Fanon, who is this. I talk about him a lot because I really, I don't even really like The Wretched of the Earth. I did read Black Skin, White Mask, not my favorite, but this was way after that, right? So Fanon centered his psychological work around understanding the minds of colonized people. And the only way that I can explain really what happened in the minds of African people after hundreds of years of subjugation and oppression is by reading this. So I'll read it. So it says, the native town is a crouching village, a town on its knees, a town wallowing in the mire. It is a town of niggers and dirty Arabs. The look that the native turns on the settler's town is a look of lust, a look of envy. It expresses his dreams of possession, all manner of possession. To sit at the settler's table, to sleep in the settler's bed with his wife or husband, if possible. The colonized man is an envious man, and this the settler knows very well. When their glances meet, he ascertains bitterly, always on the defensive, they want to take our place. It is true, for there is no native who does not dream at least once a day of setting himself up in the settler's place. Now, as a person who does not want to be envious of white people, I am envious of the power they have over African people. But at this time, you're coming out of these oppressive systems. You're coming out of understanding that you've been told for centuries, generations, that white people are better than me. So a white doctor is going to treat you better than a Black doctor, right? So that they're smarter. They generally know things are better. They generally live better because their streets might be cleaner. Their representatives might be better. I don't know, whatever we've been indoctrinated with. This is why it's part of the decolonizing our minds, people say, is a part of that. It's like your whole identity is trapped within the colonial construct of one is better than the other, one is more inferior than the other, and things like that. So I would imagine that at this moment, now you have access, supposedly by law, to everything the settler has, the colonizer has, and you're now going to partake in it. It's your right as a human being and as a person who's supposed to be a citizen of this country to partake in the things that the settler has also partook in. And unfortunately, the general, move toward living next to enjoying what the settler enjoys meant a gradual release, a gradual removal of people from their community and of supporting businesses and all these other kinds of things. And so, I think that's really it. And so I think that under colonialism, the the process of integration was one that was also beneficial to the settler, the colonizer, right? Like, so they was, why fight it? At the end of the day, these people value money. Even when they were oppressing African people, they still took their money. You could still go into a white store in some places and buy some produce because that was the only grocer in town, and they took your money begrudgingly, but they took your money. You were able to buy their produce and leave the store and don't mingle too long. So here, I think that one of the motivations really for the eventual integration being more widespread and acceptable was a financial one. Number one, the civil rights movement were winning in the courts. They were winning in the streets. They were winning social opinion. They were actually creating a situation that showed that the United States was deeply oppressive. Like, before, you can kind of like hide behind it because people weren't out on the street. But now the civil rights movement was bringing up the drudge and showing it out to the world. They had prominent leaders who were leading many things, divesting from just like the bus boycotts. You said you sitting in the back of the bus. Why do I have to sit in the back of the bus? Another challenge to segregation, right? I can sit anywhere I want to. So really dredging up the filth that the American colony was placing on African people. So this was a PR what's the word? PR disaster, right? Like, before you can hide it, before you had these good Negroes and things were kind of status quo, even though we had a little bub up from here and there, the PR crisis then is now internationally, and you're seeing African people being sprayed down in the streets with water hoses, dogs sought after them being denied, punched in the faces at counters. It's creating a PR crunch for like the United States American colony. So the motivation to integrate and to pursue integration and to enlist the federal government in the pursuit of integration was really a motivation to stay the so-called purveyor of democracy in the world, because here you are treating your citizens like shit. So I believe, and a lot of other people also believe, that the rush to integration was not merely something that African people desired, but the rush to integration was motivated politically, right? Because you can't be the number one nation in the world treating people like shit, and also financially, because here now you have access to all these resources that circulated in the Black community and allow for there to be successful Black doctors and nurses and teachers that gets these monies that circulates in that community, now is being used in white institutions toward white doctors and things like that. So you're now getting an influx of cash that you didn't have access to before, because you denied your own self. The colonizers denied their own self of the resources that Black people was using. So Black people would go and work for white people, and that money would be gone for 3 years out of the economy and inside the African economy. And so in that sense, the integration that was put on us removed all of that, as people started to go outside and started to see the white doctors' offices and see that they had better equipment and may have had different kind of skills. I don't necessarily think that white doctors are smarter. I don't think that white doctors are smarter. I don't know why you necessarily, white doctors are not smarter, that get the same training and things like that. So it really was an economic and political decision to allow and defend the decision of board versus Brown versus Board of Education, which allowed for desegregation of public schools, which was challenged by Africans and spread to other sectors. So this is really important, because I don't think that people ever really talk about this as a political tool. We kind of think like these Black people were misguided, or they were stupid, or they just really lusted after white people. And from the quote that I wrote from Fanon, that could have been it. Like, people did want what they have because they got all the good stuff, and we just kind of got, And I lived around these Black people all my life. I want to climb the social ladder, and Africans always wanted to climb the social ladder, even before the integration question even came into the picture. There's African petty bourgeoisie long before integration, right? So this existed, and so when we look at how integration also impacted like higher education. And I also want to say that, 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education, segregation is still happening. You know what I'm saying? We still have communities that are all Black. I went to all Black, primarily all Black or brown public schools in the United States. There was not one where I was the minority. I lived in New Jersey, I lived in Miami, Florida, and these are the places that I went to school, and most of the students were Black. But because of the separate, but the now the not separate but equal, you have better institutions and things like that, so you get same kind of books and things like that. So there's a benefit to the integration. I don't want to say all bad, right? I mean, economically bad, because that's where power lies, right? Like, power lies in the power of the dollar. Right now, a lot of people are interested in like divesting from stuff, boycotting stuff, because we know that our feelings don't matter. What matters is the money, the dollar, and whether or not you spend it. That's what integration allowed, this flow of money into white people. So when you start divesting, just like the bus boycott started to do, right? It was like, we ain't gonna ride your bus. They was trying to petition these Black folks. The Montgomery bus boycotts, for those who don't know, I'm a dual education. I'm sure that you do if you lived in this country. That said that that was kicked off when an African woman said she wasn't going to sit down, she wasn't going to give up her seat to a white woman, and they took her off the bus, arrested her. And so this kicked off a movement that had already been started before her, because she was sent on the bus to refuse that. She was an agent of the civil rights movement, and she was sent in to do exactly that. And other bus boycotts, other demonstrations had been held across the country before Rosa Parks. So, so there we have an example of divesting from the public buses. They were just like, if you don't want us to take the bus, then that's cool. If you saying that we gotta give up our seat after we pay, just like everybody else, then I'm gonna not come take your bus. And so the network of cars, cabs, walking Africans who came together in the community to ensure that people got to where they needed to go without having to use public transportation, because they thought it was going to be over in like a week. What eventually happened was that the bus company was just like, listen, maybe we should reconsider this stupid policy that's preventing Africans from sitting wherever they want on the bus. And also maybe we should reconsider making people get up when a white person is there, because this doesn't benefit us financially. So we're going to just eventually they caved in, and the Africans can sit wherever they want to on the bus, right? So my point being that the feelings that we have doesn't matter, that the financial aspect does matter. And so this has been one of the biggest center points of people who are against integration. And integration, not just for integration's sake, but integration because it removes money from our community, and it presents opportunities for African people to spend their dollars elsewhere. I think in all other areas, unemployment and things like that, which is also tied to the income, it maybe not so much, but the hugest thing is a loss of wealth, a loss of progression that will allow us to contend with the oppressor on a monetary level. Therefore, you have higher levels of unemployment. Therefore, you have lower levels of income and access, and then you have which prevents African people from attaining higher degrees because you can't afford college. So there's a whole bunch of things that is really tied to that financial question that we're really mad at, right? But what's the solution, right? The solution, are we saying, is to segregate again voluntarily? And even then, what do you do about the white people? Well, of course, the African People's Socialist Party solves the question about what you do with the white people, and you get them to become African revolutionaries and fight for the total eradication of the colonial mode of production, and bring and usher in the leadership of the African working class, because essentially that's going to enhance the entire world, which we've seen. If we can do what we did as African people immediately after slavery, right, in this country, build up our, like, quick, fast, and in a hurry, just popping and clicking, building things, becoming, in this small space of time, you can see what can happen, right? Like if African people were to come up under the claws of colonialism, then they're kicking and popping. The amount of growth that you can see in a world where everybody is where African people are free, all the colonized people are free, and it was spread out to other places. So for me, like personally, I'm not necessarily a segregationist, but I'm also not an oppressionist. And so I think that, but I also recognize the strategy of the colonizer in allowing now a more broader base. Let's talk about this now, because now this creates more space for the African petty bourgeoisie. Right. This creates more space for Africans who want to align themselves with white power to sidle up against white power. Because now they have access. And we've seen it more and more, particularly on the African continent, where you have these leaderships, where integration wasn't much of an issue there because, everybody Black. But here you start to see more Black people who are attaining positions of power in government. You got millionaires who are Black people, and still none of that means anything to Black people. So there are advances in the money that we've accomplished, but it's still controlled and undermined by white power, which is still the overarching power structure in this country. Colonialism is still here. They still control the means of production. And so that really makes it difficult for African self-determination to really emerge underneath the system. And then we have the African petty bourgeoisie, who of course sells out the African working class at every single moment. And so, and they're motivated by, just like what the quote that I read from Nan, they want what the colonizer has. They want to live next to the colonizer. They want to eat from the colonizer's plate. They want to take the colonizer's wife and the husband, and they live. That's like a tried and true duty thing that they probably internalize for themselves. And to be a part of the nigger village, right? To be a part of the hood, the ghettos, is not, or even to develop the ghettos to a place where it can be like in competition with the suburbs, so to speak, is not desirable, because you want to leave all of that alone. You want to hide that. And so the African petty bourgeoisie, I think, as a sector, has really, because of integration, all of these integrationist policies that had a reverberating effect, not just in the United States, but around the world, allowed for more of that sector to really develop and get bigger. So that means that we have to challenge that as well. So when we look now at the in 2024 about what integration has done, I mean, it's really hard for some people to really say, well, outside of the business issue, right? Outside of that people are really mad about, it's really hard to kind of like, challenge it to a certain degree. But I think that we should look at integration as a colonial policy too. Like, and it's a way to quell the masses. If you give the niggas in the hood, I should, a little bit of freeway, right? A little bit of throughway, you would quell the potential uprising. You would quell the desire, because you've given them a leg at the seat at the table, and that seems like progress. Especially when you come from what they say our starting point was as anonymous Africans who were enslaved or slaves, right? Like, to use that word, we were slave people. We had no past before then. So this is looking like progress to a lot of African people too, are accepting that notion that we are better off than we were 200 years ago when we just came out of slavery, because now we're able to live next to white people. Now we're not facing physical threat all the time, although that's not true. And every stat that they have out there around African people will tell you something different. We are fair. We might be able to live next to kin, but we are doing poorly in all sectors, right? Health, poor. Incarceration rates, high. Land ownership, nil. Unemployment, highest. Black entrepreneurship and businesses that actually solve some of the problems of Africa. I'm not talking about somebody who just hustles some T-shirts and puts stuff on, even though that's a form of economic development, but sectors of and let me just say this too: all my doctors are Black, every single one of them. But I gotta go find them junk. I gotta go find these jokers out in the world, right? All my doctors are Black, but I gotta go find them. So you don't. So even though we have Black doctors, there's no shortage of them. They are sometimes inaccessible, and they are sometimes just out in the world where you have to go find them. So they're not contained within the community. And so they're also treating everybody else, which is fine because doctors should be helping to treat folks. But sometimes those Black doctors are unattainable because of finances, not having enough insurance. And I was just having a conversation with a Black doctor today that I went to go see. And we actually started talking about Marxism in the appointment, and he knew about Marxism. We started talking about capitalism, and he was challenging the notion. And this doctor is from Sierra Leone, and he was kind of challenged by the idea that socialism could, replace this as a social system. So even in that vein, you have these amazing doctors who are doing amazing work and contributing that. But we also recognize in that same conversation that the enormous brain drain of Africa, the African continent, where doctors are so necessary, so deeply needed because of the underdevelopment and the targeting of the African continent, that all of there's more Africans. I think it was one statistic where there's more African doctors working in a hospital in Chicago than there is in all, in 3 African countries. You know what I mean? So the enormous brain drain that happens. And so you can also say that integration was a way for African people to chase our resources. So we knew that as the labor force that built this country, built the streets the white people were sitting on, built the houses that the white people were living in, that we were chasing our resources, just like the doctors who can't get paid on the African continent because all of the resources are being used toward Europe, are now chasing their resources by going to the place where the resources are, which is the colonizing, which is a settler colony, which is all of the places that we have to go find these doctors, as an example. But there are other examples too. So integration has been really devious, right? In fooling people. And fooling other Black people in other places. Look, these Black people, they've gotten so much, and we're trying to get like them. And when you try to talk to Africans from other places, it's like, no, comrade, like this, it's not like the reality. So yeah, you can see that I have a device that's in my hand because I live in the seat of imperialism, and that's what's flowing in that area. But when we talk about looking at data across the board, you can see that African people in the United States fare just as poorly as African people in Brazil, for example, or African people in a country in Africa. So the stats flatten us out, despite the fact that we live in a place that might have a little bit more of something. So the integration question did a really great job with healing the PR issue of the United States, right? So now the United States can now say that they were the greatest purveyor of kindness and generosity and democracy in the world, because now they're not water hosing Africans in the street. Now they're allowing the Africans to have the same sort of quality of life, as even though that wasn't true. But it looked that way because of these wins that became very popular and spreadable in the world. So, but that also, again, did a number in fooling African people from other places that somehow even though we had these wins in court, which would sometimes be challenged and overturned in some places, which was not fully and extended everywhere else, that it did a real number on making sure that African people come here with their resources, chasing their resources, and contribute to the American colony, the colonial project, with those resources, with your labor, with your skills, with your minds. So that's why when the U.S. goes to a place in the Caribbean and says they want to do AI conference on not African International, but artificial intelligence, people flock to that because they believe that this is the place where you're going to get it and you're going to have opportunities and things like that. But if the same conference was being set up by that particular government, it would be really hard for, even they might go, but it might be something that is not seen as progressive as the United States, despite the fact that the long history of the American colony has shown violence, rape, pillage, and all these other kinds of things, and still shows that throughout the world. And I think more and more people are starting to see, because of the Palestinian Israeli, the occupation of Palestinian lands, and the amazing job that the Palestinian movement is doing to expose the connections of the U.S. to this colonial. This colonizer occupation, this settler colonizer of Israel. I think more and more the PR of the United States is being challenged and destroyed. Imperialism is shaky. Integration is no longer like an everyday word, but it was. But the effects of that is now even challenging the African petty bourgeoisie and all of the colonial, colonized petty bourgeoisie, the people who advocate for on behalf of the United States. And what the United States is also doing as a result of integration, right? They're placing Africans in charge. They're placing Africans in charge of the U.S. imperial project, so to speak, right? So the five-star general that's leading AFRICOM, trying to convince Africans that the U.S. has the best intentions in Africa, is really like they're putting these Africans in charge to convince other Africans. So that's another like trick of my fault. Okay, the trick of imperialism, but also a trick of integration. They're putting these judges on the and heads of on the IC, the International Criminal Court of Justice. They're putting you in, and then when they do that, they say what we need you to say, which is imperialism, colonialism, and these Africans do it, right? These Africans do it as an agent of the American colony or whatever colony the colony they're in. So, for example, we had the judge that struck down the how do you call it? It was the South Africa raised the that there was war crimes happening in Israel or something like that, and the Ugandan judge, who afterwards was promoted to the highest seat in the court, struck it down. The only Black woman on the court, only Black person on the court, on the judges panel, struck it down. Like, oh no, this is not true. So they use us in these positions once they get us in integration. Oh, we're fully integrated. We see for the first time ever, we have a 5-star general in charge of this military apparatus that's really, really important to us. And so, again, that puts out to the world that America is this progressive place. On the other hand, Joe Biden's United States is prosecuting members of the Uhuru movement for fighting for African freedom, right? And which is antithesis of the American colonial project. And of course they would do that. But, we start to really see the shakiness of putting up these African petty bourgeoisie, neo-colonial figureheads, as opposed to what we really need to have, which is the anti-colonial, anti-imperialist approach. So integration did a whammy job on really changing the narrative of the conditions of Africans inside the United States. It also changed the narrative too within our communities, where we are less self-determined, only because we weren't forced into it anymore. And we are now greedier for what the oppressor has. We now want access to that for a number of reasons, some of the shit was better. Some of the shit was better. You know what I mean? And had we had and even though we had our own version of it, some of it was like, yo, they had all the resources. My money is going to it, that my labor is going to it. I need to get access to that. So I can understand that. But essentially, where we are right now in 2024 is we challenged by that. I don't know if they had the forethought to think about that. They saw that they were oppressed, the state of this oppression, the state of their communities, state of all of these things, which was separate, unequal. They were living in fear. They hadn't had the power, the backing of the federal government up until a point. And so now things were shifting where Africans were gaining power. Political power, economic power, and all of these things were happening in the strength of the civil rights movement, Black Power movement, and so on and so forth. So even when the Black Power movement emerged, because civil rights, civil rights was like, I'm not about that nonviolent shit. Like I'm going to take the when we try to make this into a podcast, it's going to be really hard. Cut off all the cursing. But when we trying to fight back. We are not going to allow these people who have shown us violence for our entire existence. Everything is violent. The economics is violent. The violence is violence. Everything has been violent towards us. The Black Power movement emerges and say, y'all go ahead and sit at the counter and allow somebody to punch you in your face and pour food on you. And we was just like, nah. So essentially the Black Power movement was was the anti-integration response, right? It was about forming community internationally with Africans. It was about forming community with Africans inside. It was and it was about decolonizing. Black is beautiful. Afro is being worn, fists being pumped, African clothing being put. It was a whole the colonial process. The Black Power movement was about the antithesis of integration, and that it was bringing back not just old timey 1910 African community stuff. This was bringing back the original, like African people and connecting us with that. I don't think that without that movement, the identities that we have right now as African people would be as developed as they are. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see too in other places around the world where that didn't have like the strongest Black Power movement, where they may still be like reverted back to the 1960s and just glad that somebody's allowing them to be a part of their parliament. You know what I mean? But I think this is a lesson for us that the Black Power movement of the 1970s, 60s, and 70s was a challenge to the integrationist policy, was a challenge to that old folky stuff that says that we had to sit there and take it. And it was about bringing to heal the oppressive practices that still were happening 10 years after the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education. As a matter of fact, if you were to look at video of the time of those communities, African communities were not separate or equal, and there was, so that you can see why people want to move out of them. Right, like, and so we start to see more and more of that. So the Black Power movement did a really great job on bringing us back to like, we don't need nothing that they got. Huey P. Newton was talking about intercommunalism. We were bringing back food breakfast programs, free education schools for our children to get the white people out of their minds. There's a whole process of that, getting our own military and security forces together. And so the Black Power movement was an anti-integration, Black Power, decolonial process that I think has a deeper and more profound impact on Black people today than civil rights did internally in their brains. And the civil rights movement, through all of their, also has an impact, mostly, I think when we look at the civil rights movement, we see the whole class issue start to come out, like the African petty bourgeoisie and what they have access to policy-wise. And the African working class is still in the muck and the mire, right? Like we're still experiencing the challenges to everyday life that existed, 100 years ago that have not been resolved because of integration, not having access to things. And the only way that can be resolved is to really make a challenge to the power structure, to really actually take power and use and take ownership of the means of production. Because if you allow your oppressor to manage your freedom, they will take and give at their own discretion. And we are not about allowing the oppressor to manage our freedom. Black Power movement of the 1960s and 70s were not about helping people, having white people manage our freedom. They have been managing our freedom for so long. And so we're not about that anymore. We're not about that old timey stuff. We're about being free. And what freedom currently looks like for us is to really shirk off the oppressiveness of this country, to destroy the underpinning, the thing that holds this thing up. If we look at today, the United States' refusal, downright refusal, despite major popular opinion that they should get out of Israel, stop funding Israel and all of that. If you look at that, despite people saying like, because it's politically and financially motivated for them to control that region and have control. So they have the power. So, for African people, like, you can't negotiate with something that doesn't make sense. And that does not make sense, but they're still holding on to it because it allows them to maintain power and manage the freedom of others while telling them they're providing democracy. So, we are seeing in that relationship the resistance and how that shakes out in the minds and opinions of other people around the world, even though they may not be able to contend with the United States militarily and all the other Western nations that are also feeding into Israel. But it's still, it's what Fanon says is this hunger, this tenseness of the colonizer, the terseness that we are ready to pounce at any moment, giving the opportunity. And you have to see the weakness in your enemy. You have to see the weakness in your oppressor. And even if they have more guns pointed at you, the weakness might be, what is it, how David slew the Goliath with the rock? I don't know the story. But that's the thing. Like, so you see the weakness, and despite them having military advances over you, the desire to be free is greater than what they can actually put back on you to oppress you. And we've seen that and we've seen that historically throughout the world, where revolutions have overturned the mighty and the powerful in every single situation. So, and we're also seeing it now, right? Like, we're seeing it in real time as it turns out in Palestine and Israel conflict, but we're also seeing it in Niger, Mali, and places that are emerging as in contest with U.S. imperialism, where recently Niger is like U.S. imperialism. They were working with the U.S. imperialist army, but they was just like, now you got to get out. You ain't, and we see what you get out. Like, yeah, they're biting, they're hedging their bets, and phasing out, U.S. imperialism and world imperialism out of the country. So I think that's really a good lesson to learn. So how am I on time? I think it's right here, right? I got 7 more minutes. So I'm gonna bring on Comrade Coco. I think I've talked enough. I'm gonna go ahead and repeat myself a couple times, but I'm gonna bring on Comrade Coco if Comrade Coco is available to share some announcements, and then we can go into some questions, answers, comments that we're excited to see, and your thoughts on this whole question of integration. Uhuru.
So yes, I'm here. My background isn't here. Not that I don't like y'all, but I just moved. So my background isn't here. But yes, I'm going to go ahead and do the announcements. One moment here to not set up.
While Comrade Coco was getting the announcements up, I want to, it's up already, so I'm going to let you get into it, Comrade.
All right. Oh, you can go on and say whatever you were going to say. I'm still setting up here. I know it's sharing. All right. So we're on our way to the Q&A session of the African National Women's Organization's monthly political education. Please prepare your questions or comments. Make sure that you share your name and your location and then your question. So we're going to go on some announcements here. If you enjoyed tonight's program and are inspired and it motivates you, you're African woman, we call on you, African women worldwide, to join the African National Women's Organization. We are the only anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, revolutionary organization for Black women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States. And was leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We are not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities organizing for African liberation. Join the International Collective of African Women Building Their Revolutionary Capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and to join, visit us on anwolohuru.org/join. All right. Show your material solidarity with the work of the African National Women's Organization, and will fund the Liberation Center of African Women by donating to Annual today. Support the rehabilitation of the historic St. Louis Black community. We are working on the International Headquarters for African Women, organizing the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace, and flea markets in St. Louis to support African economic development and all other events and all of our other events all over the country. Go to anwolohuru.org/donate. Wear your politics with Amwell. Amwell shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. Profits from the merchant sales support the campaigns of Amwell, including #ArrestCPS, Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective, and the Ward Council. Become a decolonizer and support Amwell Economic Development Project, Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlight ingredients and traditional care practices used by Indigenous people all around the world. In addition to feature images and quotes of African revolutionaries, and they are good, from our butters to our conditioners to our oils. Decolonize has you covered head to toe. Make your next purchase of skincare products from us at decolonize.com. And if you're in the DC metro area, you can purchase from us in person. More information on decolonize.com. Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. The trial date has been set, and the time is now to support the Uhuru 3 in our fight against the U.S. indictments. Defend the African freedom struggle, defend the African liberation struggle, defend the Uhuru movement. To find out more and how you can support, go to handsoffuhuru.org. If you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to help us produce shows in 2024, volunteer with us. And was looking for producers, interpreters, and chat moderators for future broadcasts. Email us at info@anwolohuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. Anwell has taken over hosting and managing the One Africa, One Nation Marketplace in St. Louis for the Farmers Market St. Louis for the 2024 season. And we're excited to introduce the African National Women's Organization to returning and prospective volunteers. We're looking to build a team of dedicated volunteers this market season. This is an excellent opportunity to donate your skills to the African working class struggle to address health disparities, end food apartheid, and build economic independence. Join us on Saturday, May 18th, 2024 at noon Central Standard Time for a virtual meeting to discuss market dates, volunteer positions, and how you can help forward African independence. Register at anwolohuru.org/events and click on the volunteer meeting. The Breakdown is a monthly news, analysis, and opinion program, as well as a platform for highlighting guests whose issues spotlight the international plight of colonized women struggling against colonialism. Join President Yejide Sunday, May 19th, as she interviews Sheila Silva, an activist from Brazil currently living in Germany, when they discuss the similarities and struggles of African women around the world. Harriet's Daughter Book Club and Study Group is a monthly virtual discussion that centers around African liberation related materials. For the month of May, we will be finishing discussing The Word Before, the True life story of becoming a Black Panther, keeping the faith in prison, and fighting for those left behind by Sifia Bakari, and the May selection of the the women's the May selection, which is Women's Liberation and the African Freedom Struggle, a speech by Thomas Sankara. Next discussion will be on next Sunday, May 26, 2024 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit anwohuru.org/events to stay up to date of all upcoming international, national, regional, and local events and programs. Uhuru.
Thank you, comrade.
That was a lot of announcements this time. We got a lot going on.
Yeah, we do. Exciting. We do, and we also have a lot going on, and I want to do something different for this Q&A session and comment. So I see that we have some people commenting in the chat, but I also just want to invite Comrade Jay to come on if she'd like to, just because I want to hear what y'all opinions are around integration and what you thought about, the impact of integration on African people. So yeah, you can start, Comrade.
Oh yeah, I have two clear opinions. Like, one is, we look at how this was the passing of Brown versus Board of Education was like a gateway into everything, all other sectors being desegregated, and just how that is being used to, kind of as an actual, we had good intentions with, fighting for desegregation, but them approving the desegregation and further, making it institutionalized, it is a colonial attack. It was definitely a colonial attack on Black businesses and communities, because now they were able to move us from the suburbs, because into the cities to create these hoods, these ghettos that we see all around the world in the inner parts of the city. And so they went to the suburbs, and now you're seeing the gentrification where they're trying to get back into the city and move us back out to the suburbs. So, I mean, we see that's a habitual cycle of, I understand why we want to get into these communities, or where we wanted to get into better situations for our kids and for our families, either safety wise or, economic wise, or just, housing, just physical property, material wise. So I look at that and I relate it to what's going on with the free speech with Uhuru 3, and how this is such a landmark case, because if they're able to, prove or deem the Uhuru 3 and the other co-conspirators guilty, this would be a landmark for us, the ability of how we're able to use free speech. Precedent. Yes, set a precedent of how we're able to use free speech. You mentioned Messi versus the Ferguson, which is in Missouri, being that we out of Missouri. So, you look at that and how that was a landmark precedent, and how Louisiana, I'm sorry. Oh yes, because I had to think about the time, because it's somebody else that had the train in Missouri. So how that's the precedent. And, I related that to, how they set this precedent, and then they're able to actually do their will. They can take it as us being, Black, every time they say Uhuru movement Black extremists, but they're using these Black extremists to kind of do their bidding with setting us up. And the other thing was, I wanted to bring a more of a relatable, instance as far as how this plays out. And I come from a family that's in a very, yes, Jared Scott. I come from a very a Black community here that was its own community. It was its own city, its own state. So this reason why desegregation is always so impactful for me, because of the where I come from. And here is in Cleveland. It's considered Cleveland now, but it used to be its own city, its own division of Ohio. And my great grandmother was, you know, a councilwoman, a Black woman, councilwoman. And how when desegregation came, it was a self-sufficient community. The community provided everything for itself: land, food, all of that. And it went from that to being a part of the city. And, you know, you had, you know, desegregation caused businesses, you know, businesses to close, and then came crack to, you know, kind of finish everybody off. And then now I see my cousins working real hard to, you know, revitalize that area. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Can you all hear me?
Yes, here now.
My mic wasn't working earlier. But I was just thinking about Martin Luther King has a quote, one of his less famous quotes, where he talks about how he fears that he integrated us into a burning house. And I think about that a lot because, you know, one of the main effects of integration, and I think this is on purpose, I think this is why they threw us this bone, is it actually puts more Black people in danger, because it put us in closer proximity to white people. Like, it was a means of policing us. And I think a lot about how, you know, how like every other oppressed group uses like Black people as like the measure of how oppressed things are. They're like, it's almost like I'm a Black person, you know. It's like we're hyper visible, right? And integration is a big part of that hyper visibility, and that hyper visibility makes us a target. And, you know, I was just thinking about, like, you know, my own personal experience with, you know, you talked about being from New Jersey, and it's like, we're from the same county, but it might as well be, you know, two very different places. And, you know, my school had a fair amount of white people. It was fairly diverse. It was, had a lot of immigrants. It wasn't majority Black at all. But then, you know, I got a scholarship to go to this boarding school. And this boarding school, I was one of like 3 Black kids in this boarding school in New Hampshire. And I got this scholarship. It was like the ABC scholars. I don't remember what ABC stands for, but we used to call it any Black child, you know, because we're like the only Black people that were there were part of this scholarship. And that place was extremely damaging to my mental health. It, like, you know, it was traumatizing to a certain effect. And in theory, like, the reason why my mom wanted me to even go there is that the majority of the people that go to that school go to Ivy Leagues. They are, you know, the titans of industry. You know, John Kerry, I believe, went there. Like, you know, famous people have gone there. Like, all the people that are my classmates were all like CEO, you know, the Dunkin' Donuts CEO son went there, and like all these CEOs went there. And it was a nightmare for me. And like, the idea was that, you know, by being around all these white people, somehow it will, you know, give me all these opportunities, and that I'll have this amazing network and all that. And maybe that would be true if I was an assimilationist. And I think about my brother, who I love, and he went to Harvard. He's very much an assimilationist, you know, works in finance right now. And yeah, when he went to Harvard and he was one of the few Black people there, you know, he remembers, like, he has told me it was uncomfortable, but it gave him the connections he needed fundamentally to do what he wanted in terms of his goals, which was become more of a capitalist, I guess, you know, do finance. And you know, yeah, finance is a very strong place for the petty bourgeois, you know. And you know, he has his groups, his Black finance groups that he started, that he's a part of, you know, the Black Harvard alumni groups. And so they get to feel like, you know, they can bring themselves together and maybe have these safe spaces. But fundamentally, you know, they are seeking to integrate. And I think that if you're not one of those people that's seeking to become an assimilationist, integration is really damaging. It's really harmful mentally. It's a psychic violence, you know. It's spiritual warfare, really. And yeah, and so I think a lot about that. And I understand, you know, we've all mentioned, it's understandable that they were looking at the Black schools, they were looking at the white schools, they saw how much resources the white schools had, and they saw that as Black schools they didn't have many resources. But I think it was a little bit short-sighted because they didn't see each other and their community as a resource. And without that resource of community, there's nothing, and so losing that resource has been extremely damaging to the Black community, has put us in all sorts of dangerous, harmful situations. And it's funny because I'm a young person. I'm a millennial, elder, geriatric millennial, as they say. But I look a little bit younger, so I tend to talk to the young people. The hey, you kids. Try to sneak up among them and do some agitation propaganda every now and then. But I'm talking to them, and a lot of these kids, they do not believe in integration. They're like not about it at all. Like they recognize that integration is actually like they don't want to be around all these white people. You know what I mean? They want their own spaces. They want to do their own things. And I love that for the youth. I feel like a lot of them are waking up and they're not wanting to be as assimilationist as some of the older generations. And I think that we're going in this direction where revolution is inevitable. I shouldn't say inevitable. Nothing is inevitable, but everything you have to fight for, everything you have to struggle for. But we're getting there. We're struggling towards that. And I think a part of that is people waking up to the ways in which assimilating into white culture has been horrendous, has been awful. So yeah, thanks for listening to my rambling.
Trying to get off mute. So I just want to thank Malik for the $25 donation. Thank you so much, comrade. We really appreciate that and want to encourage others to also donate. It's going to go toward this headquarters that we got. We're going to open up the floodgates to fundraising on them headquarters, but right now we're in the soft launch. But want to thank you. And I wanted to say, I see Cat Law had put some comments in, so I starred those for us. But what you were saying about being dropped into whiteness, and I tell this story periodically just because I thought I was not expecting the response that my daughter. So my daughter she went to Brooklyn public schools, which is mostly like Black and brown kids. And when we moved down here, she went to public schools, mostly Black and brown kids. And her father was incarcerated at the time. And so there was an outreach group that was, sending the children of incarcerated parents to camps. And the camps weren't necessarily filled with kids of incarcerated parents. It was like a mixture. It was like, kids. So there was this white camp up in the woods of Maryland, which can be real country, y'all. But it was a white camp, and we arrived. Naja is there, and I'm looking around, and it was like one or two Black children in this sea of whiteness. I'm like, oh, she's gonna be okay. She's a tough girl. When I came to pick up my child 2 weeks later, she did not talk. She was traumatized. She wouldn't talk. I said, what's wrong with you? And also in the first week that she was there, she got a disease, pink eye, because colonizer will poison you. She got pink eye. Never got pink eye anywhere else, but she got pink eye there. And when I picked her up, so what's the matter? And she was just like, no, Mom, let's just go home. It was exhausting for her. Like she didn't all the way, what's the word? She didn't, communicate the entire impact of it, but just the way that her demeanor was. When I went to go inside, she was sitting at a table by herself. Everybody else was away, playing and doing other things. And so I was just like, and she started to tell me that she was really isolated. And, so this idea that by sidling up to whiteness, that you might get that, but the more of a sellout you are, the more you get integrated into that society. So just like you were saying in terms of the assimilationist idea that, the more that you're willing to sacrifice, that's why they said, oh, we don't consider them Black. People can say that, like, well, she's not Black. She's like, so that's the idea of you're assimilating. You minimize the fact that you are of the colonized race, I guess, for lack of a better word, and you are now like, trying to be like them, and they love it when you try to be like them. Love it. That's why the 5-star general over AFRICOM and all these other Kamala Harris, all these others, they love it when you start to mimic them and make decisions like them, talk like them, live like them, get white husbands and wives like them, because these are all indicators too that you're safe as an African. So it makes it easier. The job well done for integration, because now it allows these Africans to feel more at home in the very dangerous and violent environment. So can we just put up what Kat did a series of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who believe that segregation is greater and more impactful and harmful, harmful purposely with using the red line in school districts specifically. What are your thoughts on that? I think I messed up how I read this. Okay.
Go ahead and bring up the second comment too.
Okay. Statistically, go ahead, Conrad.
Statistically, within districts, they are highly segregated. Do you think it's continually purposely to keep oppressed communities in one place and struggling while rich and powerful boast theirs? Absolutely.
Wealth and privilege
with no worries. Mm-hmm.
Yes, the simple answer is yes, Kat. You know, everything that we experience to keep us in our place in this society is meant to control us and to ensure that we don't move or progress or get any ideas about what we need to do. And redlining, voter attacks against voter registration and Black voter power, closing out public schools in lieu of for private institutions. And when you do charter schools, you then, because it's not controlled by the public, right, you get to set the kind of curriculum that these children are getting. So you don't know what the hell you're sending your children to unless you like do research on the school and, you know, getting vouchers and stuff to transfer public school kids to private school. So there's another attack on, you know, what's really visible and transparent, by positioning it as a better opportunity for especially for underprivileged minority youth that this charter school system. So we start to see that the more access in many cases that we are given is a double-edged sword, because it is a strategy to undermine, you know, our relevance, or undermine our self-sufficiency. So I liken this like whenever you give, you know, I remember at the eve of what's his name, Obama being elected, we were given other choices. McCain, which, you know, this old white man, he was damn near almost dead, and we had just come out of a Bush, and so I felt like Black people was not gonna allow, especially when now presented, selected, we're not gonna allow McCain to be the president of the United States, considering all of the things that we had gone through before. But Obama comes in, just like they're giving Black people out to the world right now as leaders in this country. Obama comes in and does pretty much the same sort of thing. Yet we believe that because he can do a jump shot, he can tell Black people that you need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. He can do violent economic policies that further remove.
That was his little claim to. That was his.
I mean, further remove the so-called wealth that was in it. Like, if the only thing that we got left is our homes, that was gone under Obama. He could do all of these things, right? But because he's a Black man, that you know. The point I was making is that there was a tenseness that was happening at that moment. I felt it. I felt it around me. I felt it in the voting lines that we weren't going to allow. We were right. We were right to like tear some shit down, and they gave us Obama. They gave us Obama, and I think we have to really look at this. Look over history. We can all look back. It doesn't have to be far about the strategies of the oppressor to contain the oppressed. And throughout history, this is what they do. It's not even hidden. It's not even, they write about it in their newspapers, in their books. I was watching an Africa Stream video that Comrade Coco shared with me, where the audience of there was the general army man, a black man, who was talking to an audience of government officials and U.S. officials, and they asked him, what is the U.S.'s objectives in Africa? What did he say? I forget the exact wording. It was about to target and influence. It wasn't, and the commentators were saying,
What?
you see how he didn't say that we were there for charity or to spread democracy. It's to target and influence
Yes.
for the benefit of the United States.
Correct.
That reminds me of, there's that difference between soft power and hard power, right? And so, they were doing this hard power for a while. Black people would try to, sit at the lunch counter, and they would get the dogs out and the hoses out and beat them, all this hard power stuff. And it looked really bad because the average American wants to think of themselves as part of this progressive, freedom-loving nation. And you can't, like, how do you reconcile that and then see a bunch of Black people being beaten on the street like animals? So you can't reconcile that. And so I think that they saw this contradiction and they were like, okay, we got to do something about it because the people are going to revolt. Even the white people are upset about this. And so, this, like you said, this is how they neutralize things. And it's, again, that difference between like materialism versus idealism. So, they enforce the idea of equality, but the material reality was not that at all. In fact, the material reality was taking wealth out of the Black community as opposed to bring it back in. And so, I think that's something that is really important to keep in mind, is just like, the soft power and how soft power functions right now, and how, Obama, like you said, was a great tool of soft power. And so he enacted some horrendous things, but, he was the first Black president. So, all the grandmothers had his picture on their mantle, and, it was this time of change. But like, what has changed exactly? What is better for Black people exactly since Obama? Can you think of anything? Because I can't. Like, I've only seen regression since then. And so, yeah, like you said, it's a way to like neutralize actual opposition and struggle, and to integrate that. That's what, there's the two-party system. This is fundamentally what it's about, especially when we talk about the Democrats. Their job as controlled opposition is to absorb the actual revolutionary movements that are happening and neutralize them. And so they throw out these ideals of equality and freedom and all this other stuff, while they're actively, materially taking away our freedom, taking away all of these things. But I can ramble about this all day. I'll leave it at that, though.
Ramble along. And in my community, because I live in a mostly Black and brown community. Over, like, it's mostly like people from Central America and Africa, and just Black folks, African people who were born here and Mexico and things like that. Down the street there was this like taco place, and on the side of the building, once Obama got selected, they had a mural of Obama on the side of the building. I think about year 1, year 2, they painted over that. Like, during his reign of terror, they painted over that, when you start to see the immigration policies that revved up against, and people were being deported at higher rates. Like, it was crazy. It was a hot time. And so, that's really a great, when we talk about like integration, like also what the integration win us, like, materially, like what it didn't. We don't have more, we have less. And if you were to, and I think generally people understand that, if you were to look at what we had at the onset of even though it was not so-called equal, we have less of it. And even, I think if we were to stay on that trajectory, then we would still have developed and it would have become more. But under colonialism, African people aren't meant to be successful. That's why you have white mobs that would regularly go into Black towns and burn their towns down, particularly if they were doing well, kill Black people, hang Black children, and have bond parties at the body swinging from the tree. So look at Jaribu says Obama was elected, not elected. Yes, the selection was to expand AFRICOM, and not has African here vehemently opposed this move to have America take over colonialism in Africa from the European vassals. They're putting an African face on it. And if you look at what they're doing to stack the military leadership, and they're putting an African face on it, they're installing an African by the general over at AFRICOM, they're putting Africans in different positions. And many of us who are just happy that white people are now giving us the opportunity are happy that to see a black face on something. And I don't know how far that can go anymore. I really don't know if that can even go beyond 2024 when we can see quite clearly. I mean, if you're looking how opposed to Black freedom and liberation, if you're down for that. This is people who are not with Black freedom and liberation. They just want to be next to white folks. They just want what the white folks have. But those of us who generally are sick of this rotational, colonial, cyclical thing are generally like, we got to do something else. I mean, in places where I never heard capitalism before, capitalism is being brought up. Places where I never heard colonialism before, people are bringing it up. Just regular conversations. And that tells us that we are becoming more and more in tune with the fact that this system is not working, has not worked. And people are even challenging the fact that what do we care about the Democratic Party, right? Some people are right. We care that we know that they use us. What has voting for a Democratic Party, which in the US is traditionally the party of Black folks, ever gotten for us? And so African people are really starting to look at that. That's why like the party has this campaign called voting, what is it called? Undetermined, uncommitted. Right. So they're saying like, you don't have like your vote is powerful. Right. So why vote for any of these individuals? You say my vote is powerful enough that I refuse to vote, and I'm going to vote in the wind. I'm going to vote in the wind. I'm going to vote today. I'm not going to not vote, but I'm going to vote today. And I'm not voting for nobody from these parties because they never represent my interests. And I think that's a really strong statement to have.
That just reminds me, you know how there's all those people that are like, vote because your ancestors fought and died for this. And I'm like, our ancestors fought and died for a lot of things. And I don't see people saying, do a revolution because our ancestors fought and died for that, which they did, So why is it that we have to vote?
They fought to have a better life.
Yeah, but not all these other more radical things that our ancestors also did, which was, burn down the plantation, all those other things. And, that's never brought up. Instead, it's just focused on vote, as if that's going to really do anything.
Democratic specifically.
When they were kneeling with that kente cloth, I was like, you know what? It's over for the Democratic Party. Like, they're done. Black people will never take them seriously ever again. And they have, like, I feel like as Black people, we have not taken them seriously since then. Yeah. Like, I don't know a single person that's like, oh yeah, Democratic Party, like they're for us. Like ever since that, they're like, these people are not serious. These people are playing in our faces.
I mean, it's a game. I mean, this political system is a game, and the more and more that we live in it, we start to see and gain some more confidence in our, like if somebody like we have to know what we want as Black people, and it can't be like I just want to have opportunities like white people. We can't measure ourselves against these people. We have to say, I don't want this shit for the rest of my life or for my children's life. I don't want them to have to experience violence and oppression and targeting because of their so-called skin tone. A lot of people use that. We should be, teaching and struggling toward a liberation. And it's hard because sometimes people don't recognize what freedom is. They think this is freedom. And so when I think what we have to do as revolutionaries is provide a vision of freedom, and so that people can strive toward that. Because right now, the Democratic Party, with their huge PR campaign, is telling you that freedom is voting for them. It might be the Republicans next year, this year. Freedom is voting for them. And, we can't be engaged in that anymore. And Cat Law says, I can't help but foresee the powers that be voiding all the uncommitted votes and only count the votes with the name. Somehow they'll get away with it too. I mean, they can.
It's their system.
They can,
And, even if they do, I mean, the point I think with the uncommitted votes is is to punish the Democratic Party,
Right.
to know that they cannot rely on our votes anymore. They have to earn them. Because ever since the conservatives and the reactionaries switched parties, remember how the
Mhm.
right wingers used to be
Yeah.
Democrats, and
Mhm.
and so Lincoln, as they say, Lincoln was a Republican and all these things.
Mhm.
Ever since then, the Democratic Party has been desperate to gain those people back. Desperate. And you see that. This is why every Democrat right now is an avid centrist, quote unquote centrist, but they're right wingers.
Yeah.
By any measure internationally, the Democratic Party is right wing.
Mhm.
And we're supposed to accept that they're centrist or even left somehow. Like, absolutely not. Like, they need to earn our vote. They need to actually implement leftist policies.
They'll
Instead,
pull out Al Sharpton to win our vote.
right? The pandering,
You're gonna organize a
No,
march
it's going to be.
in Washington, D.C. They pull out Al Sharpton to rally the blacks. You know what I'm saying?
They're not gonna pull out Al Sharpton anymore. They're gonna pull out they're gonna pull out somebody that's
He brings the blacks, boy. He brings the blacks to Washington, D.C. He sure do. And he brings the unions, and they organize with Al Sharpton cause a march. The unions organize, the people,
or even, do you remember like the original Rainbow Coalition,
Mhm.
which was Fred Hampton's crew. He brought the Confederates together, he brought gay people together, he brought all of these very different people together to fight the system, fight capitalism.
Mhm.
He was assassinated.
Mhm.
And what did the Rainbow Coalition become? There's a reason why Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton survived the civil rights era when a lot of our leaders did not.
Right.
There's a reason.
Because it was right next to them on the balcony in the hotel. It was all there. It was right there.
Mhm.
It's right there.
Y'all started to sound like conspiracy theorists.
No,
These are our private.
You learned our favorite thoughts. We know what these people are capable of. Okay, so we were at time. So we just want to thank everybody. This is a hot and popping. Thank y'all for coming on and rounding it out, and for your questions and comments. And this has been a really great discussion. We hope that you do tune in on Sunday, when our guest will be Sheila Silva, an African from Brazil, who is living in Germany, who has a really great insight, speaks 3 languages. She's a new animal member. Woo, woo. So we're really excited about her. And we hope that you tune in at 2:00 Eastern on Sunday. And please continue to donate to us, because we need the resources, and we need to rehabilitate and make the African National Women's Organization Liberation Center. So if we log in, if you watch this later, go ahead and click that link and go ahead and donate. If you're an African woman watching this, go ahead and join. We'll do an orientation and all that stuff, and we'll see, we'll figure it out. So thank y'all. Have a good night. We end the mystery. Thank you so much.